You were born in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia, USA. This is the place where the American dream is strangled and thrown into the gutter. Who was your father? No one knows. Maybe a truck driver or a drunk stumbling out of a bar. Your mother? Your mother was a drug addict. When you were just 4 years old, she left you in a cheap, smelly motel room. All you had was a torn blanket and a TV playing cartoons without sound. She went to get cigarettes and never returned. In America, people say everyone has equal opportunities. That's the biggest lie in the world. You were thrown into orphanages. Every 6 months, a new home, new people, and a new way of beating. Sometimes with a belt, sometimes with shoes. Your only fault was that you were alive. At school, you were like a ghost. Your clothes were old, your shoes had holes, and your eyes held the fear and hunger that children from rich families would mock. When you turned 14, you realized there was no such thing as justice in this world. It was a cold November evening. Snow had begun to fall. You were returning home, or whatever you called home, through the empty alley behind school when 3 boys surrounded you. They were older than you. They had warm jackets to wear and full bellies. Why did they beat you? Because they could. Because there was no one to raise their voice for you. They threw you to the ground. One kicked you in the stomach. Another punched you in the face. The acrid taste of blood filled your mouth. You heard the sound of your nose bone breaking in your own ears. You crumpled to the ground, just waiting for them to tire out and leave you to die. Then, the sound stopped. The boys' laughter suddenly turned to fear. You looked up through your swollen, bloodshot eyes. A black 1985 Cadillac car was parked at the mouth of the alley. A man stepped out of it, a tall, broad man. He wore an Italian silk suit. His shoes shone so brightly that they illuminated even the darkness. He had an expensive Cuban cigar in his mouth. He didn't yell at the boys. He didn't pull out a gun. He just looked at them. That cold, terrifying look of his. They ran as if they'd seen death face to face. The man came to you. He didn't help you get up. He just stared at you from above. "How long are you going to lie on the ground like this, child?" His voice was heavy and rough. "If you think crying will make the world pity you, then die right now, right here in this alley. And if you want to live, then get up." Your whole body was screaming with pain, but you got up, on trembling legs. You wiped the blood with your sleeve and looked him in the eye. He smiled, exhaled cigar smoke, and opened his car door. "Get in." His name was Sal Moretti, and that very night, that frightened, frail orphan boy died. That very night, you were truly born. Sal Moretti was no ordinary thug. He was the capo of Philadelphia's most powerful mafia, the Costa family. He gave you a place to live in the basement of his Italian restaurant, Luigi's. You had a small mattress and 2 meals a day. What did you have to do in return? You had to become a ghost. Your mornings started at 4 a.m., mopping the entire floor before the restaurant opened, cleaning the kitchen, and, most importantly, cleaning the cars of Sal Moretti and his men. If even a single fingerprint of yours was left on the car window, Sal would slap you in front of everyone. For the first 2 years, you didn't make a single penny. $0. People see the gangster life on TV and in the movies, thinking it's a life of parties, girls, and debauchery. That's the biggest lie. The real underworld runs on discipline and respect. You stood there and learned the world's biggest secrets. While the bosses sat around tables and talked, you stood like a statue by the door. You had to bring them cigars, handle their coats. You were there, yet invisible. Sal always said, "The tongue is man's worst enemy. The man who learns to remain silent can rule the world. The FBI and the police never send anyone to jail for their thoughts. They do for their words." One day, a new guy came to work. He interrupted Sal Moretti in the middle of a meeting and tried to offer some advice. He just wanted to be smart. After that night, no one ever saw that boy again. He was never spoken of. His name was erased from the restaurant's history. You locked your tongue behind your teeth forever that day. You were now 18 years old. You weren't that frail boy anymore. Your body had grown stronger, and your eyes were colder. Your first real test came when a local bookie named Tony bilked Sal out of a $10,000 loan. Sal called you over. He handed you an envelope and said, "Go get my money from Tony, and if he's forgotten whose money it is, remind him." You went to Tony's place. He was playing cards behind the bar with a shabby guy. You asked him for money. He looked you up and down, laughed, and said, "Kid, go change your pants. Has Sal started sending suckling babies?" The other men sitting with him started laughing too. Your hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through your veins. You remembered Sal Moretti's cold eyes. If you returned empty-handed, the restaurant's basement doors would be closed to you forever. A heavy glass ashtray lay nearby. You didn't think for a second. You picked it up and threw it straight at Tony's face. He fell off his chair. Blood spurted from his mouth like a fountain. You picked him up by the collar and punched him until his men's laughter turned to horror. You took the money from his coat pocket, put it in an envelope, and wiped your bloodied hands on his own coat. You went back to the restaurant. You placed the envelope on Sal's table. Sal opened the envelope, counted the money. Then he looked at your blood-stained shirt. He poured some expensive wine into a glass and offered it to you. "Welcome to the family, kid." That night, you slept soundly for the first time. You felt like you were part of the world. You felt like you had found a family. The 90s had arrived. You were no longer an orphan. You had become a trusted soldier of the Costa family. You now wore $1,000 Italian suits. You had gold rings on your fingers and drove your own Lincoln Continental. Wherever you passed, club bouncers would pull back their ropes, restaurant owners would give you the best tables, and the police would turn their backs on you. You now had your own men working under you. You collected millions of dollars a week from gambling, protection money, and union contracts. Violence was no longer an emotion for you. It was simply a way of doing business, a punctuation mark. If someone was late with a payment, you would break their leg. You were, without any anger, just like a machine. You bought yourself a luxurious penthouse. You met a woman who worked in an upscale bar. She knew what you did, but she never asked questions. You thought maybe you could live like a normal person. But in this business, normal is just a facade. You checked under your car for bombs every morning before starting it. In restaurants, you always sat with your back to the wall to keep an eye on the door. Paranoia, the disease of suspicion, had become your best friend in life. And then, in 1998, fate turned its dizzying turn. A huge arms shipment was about to arrive at the dockyard. The deal was worth millions of dollars. Sal Moretti himself was there. Suddenly, bright lights flashed all around. The sky echoed with the sound of sirens, the rapid flapping of helicopters. FBI. Someone had tipped off. There was a rat inside. Federal agents all around aimed their machine guns. "Everyone get on your knees, hands behind your head." For the first time, you saw the fear on Sal Moretti's face. He knew that if he was caught in this case, he would go straight from prison to his grave. Loyalty. In the underworld, loyalty is nothing less than divine. You looked Sal in the eyes. You didn't even think for a second. You charged forward. You raised both your hands in the air and shouted, "This is all mine. This shipment is mine. Sal has nothing to do with this. I own it all." Sal was taken away, and you were handcuffed. The case went to court. You were sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Maximum security. Prison is not a correctional facility. It's hell on earth. There, your Italian suit was removed and you were dressed in orange. Your identity was no longer your name, but a number written on your chest. Every day inside the prison was a battle. To eat, to sleep, even to breathe. You were stabbed many times, and you stabbed others many times. You buried the last remaining shred of humanity in your soul on the cold floor of that very prison. Sal Moretti kept his promise. Money kept flowing into your bank account. The prison guards were bribed to give you some relief. You served 10 years. 5 years were reduced for good behavior. In those 10 years, the world had changed. The internet had arrived outside. People had smartphones in their hands. The world had moved forward, but you were frozen in time in that prison cell. The year 2008. You were released from prison. You were now 38 years old, but your hair was graying and there were deep, dark circles under your eyes. You thought you would be welcomed like a hero. You thought the family would kiss your feet for your sacrifice. But no convoy came to receive you outside the prison. Only an old car arrived. When you went to visit Sal Moretti, he was in a hospital bed. He had lung cancer. He was breathing with the help of machines and tubes. The man whose name once made all of Philadelphia tremble was now begging for his breath. A few months later, Sal died. His funeral was huge. More than 500 people dressed in black coats came to bid him farewell. You stood at the forefront of that crowd. You thought the empire was now yours. You deserved it. But you were wrong. At the meeting, the new boss of the family was elected, Vincent, the Harvard Russo. Vincent was Sal's nephew. He didn't grow up on the streets. He had studied at Harvard Business School. He was a 35-year-old guy who wore slim-fit suits, used fancy corporate words in English, and knew more about laptops than guns. In meetings, Vincent looked at you like you were some old, rusty piece of machinery. "Leo," Vincent said, taking a sip of his coffee, "we respect what you did for the family, but the world has changed. We don't break people's bones anymore. We ruin their credit scores. We scam the stock market, create shell companies, and suck their blood legally. Shooting people in the streets is now the work of idiots. Your way is now bad for business." The volcano inside you. He was ready to explode. "Vincent, I spent my youth rotting in jail for this family. I was building this empire for you, shedding blood on the streets while you were sitting at Harvard, reading books." Vincent's eyes held no emotion. Absolutely nothing. "You were a loyal dog, Leo, and dogs always sleep outside. This is my city, and there's no place for an old dinosaur like you here." That very day, everything was taken away from you. A vote was held. Those who were once ready to die at your command, those who until yesterday bowed to you as boss, raised their hands in fear of Vincent. You were expelled. In the Mafia world, it's called banishment. It's worse than death. If you had died, you would have become a legend. But you were kept alive, reduced to a ghost. Your land, your boys, your club, everything was taken away from you in one fell swoop. You were strictly instructed never to return. In the world you had toiled for, even your name was now forbidden. Today you are 55 years old. You live in a cheap, damp apartment in Brooklyn, miles from Philadelphia. The paint is peeling off the walls. The ceiling is leaking. You have no skills. All your life you've learned to scare people and shoot. You can't work in an office. Today you work as a night security guard in a warehouse behind a mall. A $15 an hour job. You wear an old, smelly uniform. When corporate people drive past you in their expensive cars, they don't even look at you. You're invisible to them. Just like you were invisible in that orphanage as a child. The whole cycle has come full circle back to where it all began. You have no wife because in this quagmire, anyone who comes close to you is killed. You have no children. Those friends you used to drink with are either rotting in jail, sleeping in a graveyard, or hiding somewhere as police informants. What do you have left? Just a small hot plate on which you heat up canned food, and a musty bottle of whiskey, which helps you sleep at night so you don't hear the screams of those you once killed. Last night, when you finished your shift and were walking home, it was raining heavily. The streets were flooded. Then you saw him. In a dark corner of the street stood a boy. He must have been barely 14 or 15 years old, probably Latin or black. His clothes were torn. There was a fresh wound under his eye that was leaking blood. He was shivering, drenched in the rain. And what was he looking at? He was looking at a shiny Mercedes parked across the street. Inside the car sat a man wearing an Italian suit. Raindrops glistened on the windshield. In that boy's eyes, you saw what you had felt decades ago, that hunger, that anger, that helplessness. He was looking at the car driver as if he were looking at God. You could have crossed the street. You could have grabbed that boy's shoulder and told him what this world is like. You could have told him that this shining road, these expensive suits, cars, and pride of power are just an illusion. You could have told him that the Mafia never runs on loyalty. The Mafia only runs on human loneliness. They find a child who is unloved, then use him as a weapon in the name of family. You could have told him your story. You could have told him that this journey doesn't end in a golden chair. It ends in a $15 job and a dank room. But you said nothing. You stood there because you knew he would never listen to you. No one does. Everyone thinks they can win this game. Everyone wants to be king, even if it means cutting off their own head to wear that crown. The car window rolled down. The man inside gestured to the boy. Without a second thought, the boy opened the car door and got in. The cycle had started again. Another scapegoat was ready. You turned up the collar of your cheap coat. You stuffed your trembling hands into your pockets, and into that cold, dark rain, you disappeared like a shadow forever. If you liked the story, then please like it. What would you do if this turn comes in your life?